It took massive amounts of fortitude to maintain focus on the path that I felt the ancestors and I had agreed was for my highest good. I had been shown the confines and constraints of my self exploration, and I used that to keep myself calibrated and moving forward. I explored the edge of healing under the pedagogy of psychedelics and other less respectable medicines. I would go as far as the hurt would allow, redirecting my course long before soul sucking shame set in. Any feelings of guilt or shame meant that I had lost the vision and intention for my engagement with those substances as a modality for healing, and I was careening toward a dead end. Most of my altered nights were spent in quiet study and in research of other ways of being, with fungus being my fodder for study. It eventually led me to a certification program in psychotherapy and acceptance into a master's program in the same discipline. While overjoyed at this unfolding, taking it as validation as to the next step in my healing journey, to bear my scars to others and lend validation to their own transmutation journeys from tragedy to triumph. My acceptance to an institute on the West Coast came with some unsettling and upsetting caveats. The program was only available to active residents of the United States. The news was destabilizing. To move again was to once again kick up dust, and I was afraid of what was in store for our future trail and tale of ashes and ascension. Was the healing that I had catalyzed crystallized enough into my being that I would be able to build a foundation on top without the fear of a massive regression and backslide? I was concerned that in pursuit of higher learning, I would succumb to the familiar dis-ease of self-doubt and insecurity. I knew I was open to my healing, and also knew that the program was based upon the concept of the practitioner's self being the first client. But I was timid about the pedagogy of the healing of others. What worked for me was trial and error, and the liability of a possible Murphy's Law in any advice I'd have to give based on my own journey is a steep one to bear. Although the ancestors were sympathetic and showed grace for my actions, they also knew my heart. The system seemed not to care about my intent. I was judged based only on my actions, past and present and projected future. Given the former being a product of that system, the field of mental health does not historically support the healing of the whole self in relation to its parts. I did not feel that I could show up as my authentic self, still raw from the wounds of my own battles. I could not have my scabs falling off in front of clients, could I? It would signify that I was still fresh from the fight, if not still in battle myself. If I were honest about what my journey had entailed and the dark roads that I had had to walk down, would they understand that necessity, or would they pathologize it and endanger the progress and nature of the work for both parent and child? These answers are still revealing themselves to me in our current location in the Pacific Northwest. I was unprepared for just how much the world had changed due to the ensuing pandemic. We had hit a point of singularity, and there was no going back. The whole planet changed timelines, and it seemed to me that things were evolving at a rapid rate. First, the pandemic forced people to choose allegiance to a location. The world went into a panic, and although travel restrictions were easing, the forced lockdown dictated that everyone find their shelter wherever and with whomever that was for you, and wait out the storm of unforeseeable magnitude. Unknowable magnitude, I would go so far as to say. It was as if a conspiracy bomb exploded and layers of deception and denial, since the dawn of civilization, started to be uncovered. As fascinated as I am by all things obscured, occult, and esoteric, my focus was on restabilization by way of finding as many slides as I could for my son and I. More than ever, we needed to stay where the fun was. The war inside me continued to wage with the acute stress of constant metamorphosis and transmutation, amplified by my choice of new home in a city in the Pacific Northwest. Like me, it too was healing nonlinearly. I believed that even the worst therapist would be good for someone, and I planned to be a good therapist. In a future utopia, simply encountering a healed person would be therapy, I believe. With the pandemic's devastation of the social order, I hoped that there were enough good people among the city's residents to make up for the lack of mental health workers available to support the cultural unrest. The lack of affordable housing being a great factor in lagging mental health, a basic need out of reach for so many, resulting in many of us being stuck in survival mode. It took a while to find our footing with the financial abuse from my ex husband, the constraints of single motherhood, and a lack of support from family, friends, living across the country from all that was familiar and being as estranged as we all were, or community members. We were navigating a new frontier, and it was a metaphysical mystery how we survived the torrid transition with the same poise and grace as all the others mere nanoseconds before stretching back ad nauseum. We gave each other the sustenance to survive, and despite the seeming slide deeper into the dark unknown, we clung to a hope to thrive in the near future. Always near. I find that it helps to reverberate any small healing into the cavernous expanse of self and society, treating each of the hurt and hurting with its resonance and healing frequency. When we were fed, we made sure to donate food to the local unhoused and unfed folks in our community and on our streets. Clothes are donated to the same charity shops we frequent for our own needs, or they are put directly into the hands of those in need in our neighborhood. We treat each other with this same ethos of care, with each one of us giving a little more than they feel they get. With this, I include entities whose care we prioritize in our periphery, our plants and occasional adopted pets, cats and birds, all enjoying our camaraderie with the knowledge that all were welcome here. I know this to be true of the home I made of our small vintage apartment in a southeast neighborhood. I am still struggling to feel the full invitation to embrace myself within the arms of the citizens and community. In fact, if I am true to the guidelines stipulated in the aforementioned artistic integrity, I would say that the city has already broken my heart in more ways than I would like to admit. The first 2 years were especially displaced and grueling, leaving again to return to Ecuador to retrieve the last of our belongings from our little casita on the coast. We changed apartments thrice before we found ourselves settling in the southeast. We were happy to have a place to unpack, ashes and all, and placing them temporarily on a metaphorical shelf, giving ourselves a much needed rest before taking up the mantle once more. I needed to figure out navigating graduate school and the fact that nearly everything had transitioned to a virtual platform, a struggle for my neurodivergence, but a necessary means to an end post pandemic. I do not schedule super well, and certainly not schedule in a way that prioritizes sitting inhumanely long periods in front of an inanimate object. In fact, for all of my life's movement, I learned super slowly. I guess that is evident by the very fact that I did not stop traveling sooner. For sanity's sake, I have a few diagnoses that are resultant of a life of trauma, PTSD being one of them. As soon as the DSM, or the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, allows for the complexity in its range and expression, my PTSD will surely be sporting a C in front of it. I have taken the ACEs test measuring the probability that a person with certain adverse childhood experiences would be susceptible to major mental health disorders, substance abuse, etc. In my case, there was no box left unchecked. This meant that if I ended up in a ditch somewhere like a runaway marble, there would be a statistical reason why. The math makes the science, and the science is determined by society's institutionalized priorities of power and privilege. Having neither, I was not a priority. But I had neither because I was not a priority and never was, not vice versa. What rights did a black woman have in the world of historic white male supremacy? My requests were denied, and my demands were ignored. I felt I had to take what liberties I had. Brazenly ill-begotten. Robin Hoodlum in thinking that my thievery in taking back my dignity and place in society as much I could held honor. And while I am determined not to be a victim, I am nonetheless battle weary from this war I did not wage, and yet am still having to hold hope of someday winning. For my son's sake, if not my own. The constant recovery from the endless struggle is akin to blunt force trauma to the brain, and is still all that I know. I am not without blame for my life's choices. Those choices that I had were predetermined in its restriction primarily, and as a result of mismanagement in the name of progress secondarily. There was no true free will. It was a maze of mostly dead ends, access denied, secret handshakes, and passwords. And the fuckery being that there was is no option not to engage. The only enriching aspect of this life that I have found are the people that make it worthwhile. And while my manic meandering might appear pathological in actuality, it makes a lot of sense. I prioritize my interpersonal relationships above all else and need to travel in order to tend to them. And while another plane ticket is akin to another blow to the back of the head, the rewards are that those relationships are healing as a result. People that truly get me and see me in my fullness and perfect imperfection. Besides, the trauma is beyond travel. It is beyond childhood. It occurred in utero and beyond intergenerationally. It is ancestral, and as such, it is only fitting that the ancestors accompany me on my odyssey of ashes. It is their ashes as much as it is my own. In some ways, it is fitting that all come along as well as these ashes also belong to you. They belong to all of us, and my father is just a conduit for the healing that we all must do. With my father dead, I now view all of my interpersonal relationships as something sacred and made great efforts to show up for them at all cost. It was an opportunity to reevaluate relationships as well in terms of their value to me. Were they nourishing relationships? Were they of substance? There was only so much room in my people garden, and only so much energy I could spend on tending to it. I made a mental list of relationships, patterns, and characteristics, and whether or not they were helping or hindering my growth as an artist. That priority took precedence and afforded me the time I needed to rework aspects of self that I too needed to burn and bury along with Dad's ashes. If I was lucky, my most highly valued relationships would offer me all the things that were vying for completion, namely the scattering of Dad's ashes, and with it, this journey of grief that I had been on for over a decade. I was becoming a worn out wail of a wandering wild woman, a modern day banshee who screamed into the wind in the form of ashes. More than ever, I needed to conclude my quest and settle the storm and the ashes carried on them.